of James. In particular, I am Chad Post from Open Letter Books. God, I fucked this all up. Let me start this over. I'm gonna wait. Can I do that? Yeah, I
Just
can.
keep
I'm just gonna
going.
cut this. I'm just gonna cut this. Okay. So
Sure.
3, 2, 1. Welcome to the 2 Month Review, a weekly podcast brought to you by Open Letter at the University of Rochester, in which we take a giant book, break it down bit by bit, section by section. Although this season, our 25th, we are having two books. We're going to do James by Percival Everett, which we're starting with today, up through page 60. And then we'll move on to Empire of the Senseless by Kathy Acker, which may seem like an odd pairing, but both of them involve Huckleberry Finn. I am Chad Post from Open Letter Books, and I'm joined as always by Brian Wood, author of Joytime Killbox. How you doing, Brian?
Fantastic. February is my favorite month.
February, yeah, and again, our podcast, which recognizes Black History Month, unlike Google, who is too busy
Mhm.
slurping on Donald Trump to actually be a meaningful fucking anti-totalitarian company. Kaya, Strominus, editor, translator, how you doing? Your Volvo looks nice.
Got a sense of deja vu, boys.
Anyways, if anyone's watching us on YouTube, which you should be, because you can do that, you can like us, you can subscribe, do all the ratings, so on and so forth, and you can see Kaya hanging out in her Volvo.
Yeah, and I'm still currently, for whatever unforeseeable time, the editor at Open Letter Books, and I translate from Latvian.
That's all you do.
That's
That is
all I do. And I'm soon to be just sitting in my Volvo,
that's gonna be that'll be
living in my Volvo. Just this is welcome to my house. This is the 25th season of 2 Month Review and the first ever episode of 2 Month Review Cribs.
I always assume that like 96% of NPR listeners are listening in a Volvo.
Oh yeah.
Um, just because like my experience in the Bay Area, the station KQED, like without question, was on the back of a Volvo. I think it'd be best if they recorded inside of Volvos as well, just so we get the correct acoustics to go with
Hmm.
where they're going to be listening. I'd like that pairing. I think that's perfect.
I
But
think
what
there's
percentage? What about
actually
Subarus?
That's Subarus is just 100%. I don't know, like
that's
Natalie
where you
Merchant. You only
that's
get
where you
Natalie
go to grind.
Merchant and yeah.
Natalie Merchant.
I think you can actually pretty soon. There are some public libraries are giving you an option to rent a Volvo for an hour at a time to listen to NPR shows, podcasts.
I love it. I love it.
At the U of R, at the student union, they have a sign. They have two signs. One where you can rent a hammock, and one where you can rent a sunlat for seasonal affective disorder.
Yeah, and
Which
if you
those
have
two
a
things
Ford
seem to
Ford
match.
F-150 Raptor, enjoy the Joe Rogan experience and some podcast by a ex-Navy SEAL that's gonna teach you uh, how to
So,
survive these crazy times.
You can also rent a Cybertruck and they give you a free pack of magic erasers to scrub off the spray paint dicks that people leave
Yeah.
on them. It's very
I said literally like 20 minutes ago that if I were any younger, I would be spraying fuck Elon on every single Tesla I could find. And just if I go to jail, I go to jail. If I get fined, I take out a credit card. I don't give a shit. Like I would have no remorse. But I'm no old now and I can't do that. I can't run. My knee hurts. So I
Yeah.
couldn't flee the cops.
So I was very excited about this book, James, because I had no idea it was Heather's pick. And so I don't know Heather necessarily, but Heather likes this book. And so I'm excited to find out, is it worthy of a Heather's pick?
that's a much flashier sticker than the New York Times and the Envy.
Bro, hardcore first edition, no sticker.
Whoa.
Look at this.
Okay.
Like I'm the OG James. Got this down. If for anyone who's not watching, you can see everyone has different stickers atop their front of their book because this book has received a lot of attention and a lot of awards. I thought it had won more than it has, but it won the Kirkus Prize in 2024 and also the National Book Award for Fiction, and was a finalist for the Booker Prize and appeared on 33 lists for best books of 2024. So I would I would argue maybe that like from a commercial and like contemporary perspective, this is the most popular book we've ever used on this podcast.
Probably means we're gonna hate it then.
Most likely, because if it's popular, it's shit.
We
That's
can't
all I
possibly
know.
we can't possibly like something that people like. That's
No,
not
that's not
Yeah.
that's not my forte. It's
Yeah.
not my brand.
Yeah.
how do I'm super naive to like awards and panels. Like I've never judged an award thing before. I'm sure it'll be somewhere in my future. I'll have to do it. But like, how does that even work?
Yeah, it depends obviously on the type of award. The Man Booker one, well, generally I don't know.
Like, is it
Once
like
I
the
get involved
Grammys,
with it.
right? Cowboy Carter wins the Grammy for Best Country Album when it's not really a country album, and it's not even Beyonce's best album in the last couple years. Like, Lemonade doesn't win, but Cowboy Carter does. This makes no sense. I don't even know what these awards actually mean. Do they matter?
Well,
Like,
yeah, context is
is
everything,
books,
obviously.
is the book world similar to something
Yeah.
like that?
Context is very important, like who you're up against, what other options are available.
Yeah.
There is that, like, I don't think it's quite like the Oscars where it's like young, important actress does amazing role, doesn't win because they give it to old aging actress who has not won. Then young actress becomes old aging actress and gets a Oscar for not their best movie because they've never been awarded it for their best movie. Like, I don't think it's quite like that in the book world, but there is a problem. Yeah.
Did you watch
Yeah.
The Ricky Gervais show Extras
Yeah. Oh,
God, did we watch that? Yes.
with Kate
oh,
Winslet?
Oh my God, she's so fucking good.
And they say like,
national treasure.
you know, she had never
Yeah.
won an Oscar, but she says like, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna do a Holocaust film and I'll win one." And then like 2 years later, she does The Reader and she wins wins an Oscar.
This show
Like
is
they
Called
so
call
it. They
in a
called.
satire, they call their shot, and then it actually takes place in reality. It's like, oh God.
isn't it? It's in extras that she's super filthy too, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Isn't she like chain smoking and just like,
Saying
So you
all the
think
words.
so the
yeah.
award things are context. I mean, it's got to be, I would assume it like serviceably like a good piece of literature.
So I think like generally, and when there's enough entries and depending on like the nature of the award, a lot of times the things get split up too. So like there's ways like for our Kafka prize I do at the university, there's like, 150 submissions. So nobody reads all 150. We have them split up between us. It may even be more than that. It may have been 180 last time. And then you put forward recommendations. And I know with the National Book Critics Circle, every member of the committee for that prize can put forward a recommendation. So they don't all read the same things, which I think allows for a lot of things to slip through the cracks at different points in time. Like this might not even be Percival Everett's best book, but his best book may have like slipped past because
Mm.
of whoever was assigned to. But then within the finalists, like when we ran the best translated book award, that was very similar. But when it came down to like the long list, everyone read the long list. Like once I went to, and maybe it was like even like the submissions for the long list. Like here's 20, we have to have 10. Everyone would have read those. And then like the debates start on like how do you shorten it? And one thing that like various people have said, this is not original to me, and like I don't want to say like that's true of this book, but is that frequently like the second best book wins. Like because the book that usually like is one that there will be half of the people love and half don't. The book that's like the one that sort of bifurcates the voting. And then you're like, okay, we can't really have this win, but this one that we all kind of agree on that maybe isn't the best, but we have differing ideas of what the best one might be. Let's just settle on this. I don't, again, don't want to say that happened in this case, but in a lot of juries that I've seen, that's been like that plays out. Like
So it's exactly like electing a pope.
yeah, exactly
Yeah.
like Conclave.
Yeah, I just watched Conclave. So.
Fucking all I know is that I never want to watch that movie, and I've heard nothing positive about it except that it's nominated for an Oscar, which makes me think, fuck the Oscars.
Okay.
So I have a quick question, and I think the answer is probably yes, but have either of you read Percival Everett's work before?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I had not. This
Okay.
is my very, very first Percival Everett book. And this is I said to Chad briefly on the phone that I had one thing original to bring to the table today for this. And I wanted to ask because like that's why it's interesting for me because I don't know that I would have picked up anything, not for any other reason than just like, I don't know. I just don't know that I would have picked anything up of his if we hadn't had done it for the podcast.
Really?
Um, but well, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know why. Again, for no specific reason. if someone had recommended it to me or something other of his, I would have. It's just not, he's just not a name that's for whatever reason has not come across my to read list. But interestingly enough, Danzy Senna, he is Danzy Senna's partner. And
Yeah.
I have read maybe, I'd have to double check now, but I'm pretty sure I've read everything that she's ever written. And I started reading her in high school. Um, so that's my connection to
And
Percival Everett stuff.
I've not read her because that would be a DEI thing for me. And I'm just like, I'm just straight and narrow. I don't want to offend the Pope or our king or whatever the fuck. No, that's interesting. Brian, I got to grab these books. You talk about which Everett books you've read.
Sure. I've read some short stories from him and then Erasure. So I'm not really well versed in them. Um, I don't know. I always kind of got the vibe that he's got a, really good sense of humor. There's a definite sense of kind of irony and some satire at play with his work.
Little Bullwinkle,
Um,
would you say?
sure,
Cool.
yeah, yeah. And then I always get the sense that like he has like this like he knows what his role is and doesn't really necessarily like it. Like I'm an award-winning author. I think awards are stupid. I don't really I can give a shit if I win or I lose. Like I get that sense. Or it's like I'm a
Yeah.
black academic author. I don't really care. I don't want to be put in any kind of like don't box me in. I'm just an author. Like I get this sense that he's always kind of like he likes to be like right like to me he's like always on like the edge and kind of looking in and then looking out like he's this really interesting spot where he writes from that I really like.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, the dude cranks. Like since over the past 40 years, he's published 24 books.
Yeah.
At least the Wikipedia says that this list is incomplete, but that's still like a ginormous amount of like books to write. Well, you're also teaching. I mean, I don't think he was a USC professor that whole time. I think
Yeah,
but yeah, I mean, he's had various successes along the way. Like Glyph was the first book I remember coming across and reading at the bookstore, and that came out in '99 from Grey Wolf, who was his publisher for a good long period of these. They did not do Erasure, which actually came out from University Press of New England, which has to be the biggest hit that UPNE ever had in their lives. Because Erasure also, if you don't know, was made into American Fiction, the movie
Mm.
from last year. And it's a pretty straight adaptation. If I remember, I read that book a long time ago too, but you've
which
read
is
it.
hilarious because he's on a panel. His character is on a panel to select a book.
Yep.
And like the fights they're having with the like the white academics and the black academics and it's just like oh it's so hilarious
It's
these things
really
it's so good.
He's still on point. But I also have read Dr. No, which is relatively recent and is like a sort of obviously James Bond invented. This is part of my, Kyle, you have heard me talk too much about this, of books in which they go along and all of a sudden they become fucking comic books at some point. Like all of a sudden there's a supervillain who's caricature like, and it is the Rocky and Bullwinkle thing. This makes more sense in context of this reference we keep making to an interview he did with Seth Meyers, in which he said that Groucho Marx, who is it? Twain, Marx, Groucho Marx, and Bullwinkle are his three like
And his
inspirations.
father,
And
and his
his
father.
father, yeah,
His father
Um,
was number.
oh, his
that's where
father,
his
sorry.
Yeah.
like sense of humor comes from.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it does have that kind of thing where it pops up with like all of a sudden there's like a dude that, has too much money and can do anything and is like that supervillain from like a Bond movie. So it fits that and satirizes that. Like he's a good satirist, like in terms of like what things are. The other book that I have that I've never finished is this amazing,
Oh
amazing
wow.
artifact from it's not artifact, but great book from Akashic called A History of the African American People, proposed by Strom Thurmond. A novel is told to Percival Everett and James Kincaid. And it's an epistolary novel of pieces back and forth about being Black in America. This too, I wanted to read it because I've started it like twice, but just had to put it down. And I wanted to read this whole thing before this season, but I did not have a chance. But that he did come to Rochester in whatever year I put it in the post about this. Like it would have been like 2008, maybe 20 somewhere 2007, 2008. So he was still like on the cusp of becoming like kind of like one of the black writers for of American letters, right? Colson Whitehead would be one, obviously, of living ones. Toni Morrison was at the time, is no longer. There's like a number, Claudia Rankine, like there's people that fit this trope, but he's like one of them now, is like the big names. And he was like on the cusp of that. Super sweet. You sent that video this morning, Brian, of like the Seth Meyers interview where he is like totally nonchalant and like nonplussed and is like, kind of don't care. They told me he's like, they're like, I hear you're a professor at USC. And he's like, yeah, I guess I've heard that too. Like, just doesn't really like engage with like come up to it. And he was very like that. He sat through the longest argument I've had with Dimitri Anastopoulos about who is more corrupt, Jim Calhoun or Coach Krzyzewski, for like a good 20 minutes of a heated debate about random college basketball. And Percival Everett's just like chilling, just cool, no big deal. So I have a special soft spot for him. I think he seems like a, I mean, he seems like a wonderful dude.
I mean, in the book too, like we have to get into it, but this is super fun. It's like I know just on a very surface level, and I know we're gonna get into the weeds of it, but this is very enjoyable. I'm very much enjoying this.
Yeah, before we do that, I think, unless you guys disagree, I think that we should take a slight detour into Huck Finn because this is obviously a book that, if you don't know the story, James is the runs away with Huck Finn in Huckleberry Finn. He is the slave of whatever her name is, Miss not Watson, something like that, and escapes because he thinks he's going to be sold to New Orleans, down to New Orleans, and so he runs away. But at the same time he runs away, Huck Finn fakes his own death. So James assumes that, or in there it's like Jim assumes that he's going to be like, you know, hunted because they'll assume that he killed Huck Finn. So he's like, oh shit, now I've got to go with you. And they go down the river and have a series of adventures. It all ends up like okay. But Huck Finn is like such a controversial novel, and has been for a while, in the sense that it was always been taught. I read it in high school.
Mhm.
It's always been like, you know, a quote unquote great American novel, Twain being like the great American satirist, so on and so forth. But it does use the N word like 247 times or something, right? And
Yeah,
so within like the context of where it's mostly read, because I know that in the Toni Morrison intro, she does say, and he says he read it like 15 times in a row before writing James, that it is like appreciated by people who are sophisticated readers. But having just reread it for this, it's such a like kids adventure novel on like its basic level. But like if you teach it to kids, or have them read it when they're like, you know, between the ages of 14 and 17, they don't have a sophisticated literary understanding. They're not familiar. They can't engage in a conversation about the use of the N-word within the context of this book because they're
mhm.
just not smart enough yet. They're not read enough. They're not like, they don't have the critical capabilities. So the book ends up being like, you know, real, I mean, it's an easy target to want to like remove from the syllabus and from schools. Yet there is some value to reading it. However, the kids aren't ready to read it. It's sort of my take on that controversy.
Mhm.
But there's good reason for a black writer to write a, you know, different version of that book in which the black character is foregrounded and it is his story.
Yeah.
Certainly. Did either of you read? I don't have the date in front of me, but there was a novel called Finn,
Then no.
in which it takes. I want to say it was like maybe early 2000s. I don't have other internet source in front of me except for the computer, but I recall it. I read it and I recall it being just like whatever. But it was the idea of it was like when Wicked was coming out and like let's take the villain and look at their perspective, and it was his Huckleberry's father. And so we
Oh,
learn about him being dead in the cabin, how he ends up dead in the cabin, all this stuff. It tells you all that
Interesting.
backstory. So I had read that one and I was familiar with that one. And so then I thought this is like such a more like obvious and more meaningful retelling would be this story. And I don't know why it took so long for this one to come about. Um, but like it just seems like so obvious that this would
yeah.
be the if you want to tell the story again, tell it through Jim's perspective. Like that makes so much sense.
So it
Yeah.
is. It's by John Clinch and comes out in 2008. But I
2000.
agree. Like
Okay.
even when this book first came out, or I first heard about it before, like as a deal that it was coming out, that the rights had been sold, and then it comes out, and I was like, well, I feel like this is just redundant. Like, don't we have like four of these books already? But we don't. You're
Yeah,
right.
I was very surprised.
The one that like sort of that I was reminded of by my friend Mike Flatt, who might be listening to this, but was that he talked about Paul Beatty's The Sellout, which is also a Huck Finn related book in which there's a guy who doesn't want his kid to read the word end, so he replaces it with like both slave and some other like words and reframes Huckleberry Finn by not including that. Just like
Wasn't that like a professor at the University of Alabama, a white dude, was trying to get it he was trying to get a censored version where all the racial epitaphs were going to be slave. And it's like that's not the same thing. Like
it's not the
No,
same thing.
that's that doesn't compute. Like that's not right.
Yeah.
no,
Just ban the book completely or read it. Like do one or the other. Like, but like to like make these adaptations would be just bizarre. It's
yeah.
like that's a bad translation.
That's
It's bad. It's bad.
facts.
It's a bad look for translation. Chad, I see you got your reading glasses on, so I don't want to derail you, but since you brought up the Toni Morrison introduction and asked us to also look at it, and we are talking about the discomfort around the N word. And she talks about in her introduction about the numerous times that she read it, including in the mid 50s through the lenses of Leslie Fielder and Lionel Trilling. And she doesn't go into too much detail, but um, she says that she concluded that their criticism served me better than the novel had, not only because they helped me see many things I had been unaware of, but precisely because they ignored or rendered trivial the things that caused my unease. So I thought that was interesting, and I would like to look into what that is. Um, but then to go off what Brian, I think, was saying, she goes on to say, in the early 80s, I read Huckleberry Finn again, provoked, I believe, by demands to remove the novel from libraries and required reading lists of public schools. These efforts were based, it seemed to me, on a narrow notion of how to handle the offense Mark Twain's use of the term N-word would occasion for Black students and the corrosive effect it would have on white ones. It struck me as a purist yet elementary kind of censorship designed to appease adults rather than educate children. Amputate the problem, band-aid the solution. Um, and that's, I think, yes. That's,
I really like that line though of appease adults rather than educate children.
yeah,
Like I think
yeah,
that's
because
so like yes,
yeah, and
that's
she
it.
also talks about how
I think kind of froze for a second here.
Probably
I'm
one of the safety features of the Volvo.
Yeah, it's like too much too get too excited and you have to shut it down. Got to keep you in line. I believe that what she would have been referring to, the Leslie Fielder, is Love and Death in the American Novel, of
Oh,
which
okay.
there is a 20-page section here on Huck Finn. But I'm trying to see if there's anything specifically related to the the use of the epitaph, but I don't see that. But I agree with you, Brian, going back, is that is a great line of like, appease the adults because it is a lot about that more so
Because
than
you can read the book and you can teach the book, but it's going to take a little more time, you
yeah,
know?
and sensitivity. Like you
Yeah.
have to be able to like I mean, and part of the argument for the book itself is that it is a representation of that world. And there is like a distance between Huck Finn's narratorial voice and the sort of racism that he's surrounded by. Like
Yeah.
he's not part of like one of the tricks of the book is that he's dead, right? Like everyone assumes he's dead. So he's allowed to like pass through these lands without being embodied in that sense. And so there is enough distance to be like reflective on like I think it will show up in this book, like the people who call themselves the kings, the king and the prince or whatever, that are total grifters.
They
Um
just got off of the boat on April
yep,
1st.
on April 1st, and they're just grifting along, claiming to be
Yeah.
all sorts of stuff and come up with all these schemes and like our true like confidence man con men. And Huck Finn can be like, these people aren't good because he's not, but he can see the society. And I think there's bits of that related to Jim. One other thing or that I want to say related to that I think might tie into this book, and then I don't know if anyone has anything else about Huck Finn, but is at the end of Huckleberry Finn. Um, Jim is captured essentially. Like he's like in a Well, he's in like a house, a hut or whatever, and this family is planning on selling him or doing something with him. At least that's assumed and implied. And so Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn are together, and Tom Sawyer's like, "We gotta save him. Like, well, let's save him. He's your friend. Like, we gotta save him." And they're like, "Okay, we could just go in and like let him out and like help him get away. Like, that's fine. He's not like there's no big deal." And Huck and Tom Sawyer's like, "No, you've not read enough books. The way that this works is we gotta like." Chop off his leg to free him from his handcuff, and then he's got to scratch into the wall all this stuff like his seal and like these words about how he'll survive, and you got to dig a tunnel to China and like all these things. Like, have you ever like read one of these adventure books? And I bring it up because I think that it's an interesting moment in that book where they're talking about like a narrative construct having to apply to your life. Like you can't just be like, oh, you can just get free. Like who cares? It's like, no, you have to follow these rules of like how the story works. And within that world, like Jim is like automatically confined to a role. And I think that part of what James, the Everett book, can do is like redefine what that role is by both investigating like how it's placed upon not only the character but upon like what you're saying, Brian, about Percival Everett as an author. You're a black author, you write black author things, right? And he
Yeah.
rebels against that in these like
Mhm.
various ways because that narrative that's been like foisted upon you is so inaccurate and like confining. So I thought that that part of Huck Finn, like really like reading that right before we started this, is like that part resonates with me
Like I
for
remember watching a Burroughs interview and somebody asked him like what it was like for him being a gay author. And he was appalled and said like he got mad like and you know how his voice is he got like really mad and this is when he was like really old like super heroin-y like, that was always him
yeah.
he was 14 years old at the time no it's like this was like he was like super gaunt and he goes how dare you I've never been gay a day in my life don't you dare call me a gay author and it's like when asked about it later like to like expand on that it's like what are you talking about like you're clearly gay and he's like well, no, like I'm not part of like a gay group. I don't want to be like put into a box
Yeah.
as like don't do that to me. And like that was his response. But he did it in a way where he like shoots somebody in the face.
Yeah.
Like, like the tact that he had to answer it was that, but
I mean, sort of like shooting his wife in the face.
exactly.
Oof,
Yeah.
a little too soon. Yeah,
Too
and I think
soon. It was like 1910.
he was a million years old. But that idea of like escaping the boundaries of narrative will be really prevalent in the Kathy Acker book.
Yeah. So wait, I've got a quote that I think with what you just said about Jim and Huckleberry Finn. Let me pull this quote from an essay, and I think that'll take us into James perfectly, if you'll allow
Okay.
me. So this is from Dr. Cassandra Smith in an essay. And I don't know. Oddly enough, she's from the University of Alabama. They're really into this book apparently. And she says that Jim is an illustration of the kinds of social maneuvers African Americans adopted to navigate a larger hostile world. So a mask you have to wear in order to navigate a hostile world.
Right back into confidence, man.
Shall we go to James?
I'm
Shoot.
gonna have to wear a mask after and I'm gonna say shut me down for agreeing with Toni Morrison.
Yeah.
Yeah, you went rogue and fell off of the whole podcast real quick there. So you were talking about that, but you were also talking about how much fun you found the book. Do you want to talk about your first reaction? Because this is your first Everett. This is your first
It is my first Everett, and I
Bridges.
mean, I started looking, so I started immediately trying to remember bits and pieces of Danzy Senna's writing because I'm wondering, like, are they just not just, but are they a duo of authors who love to play games with language and with linguistics as well? And it's super fun. I don't remember Huck Finn in detail. I read it probably within the last 5 years or 6 years for the first time ever. Um, but I love the linguistic. Again, this is the very superficial aspect, but I love the linguistic game of it. I love the linguistic aspect of this, like of them, the slave families, these black people living like like a secret sleeper cell of
Yeah.
literati in in this world of like,
There's scrolls.
yeah, and like, and I
Yeah.
can't remember what it was, like a, is it a Disney movie or something where there's like a group of like puppies. Oh no, it's like Super Pets or something where they're like this old basset hound is teaching the puppies how to like pee in shoes and like but also act super cute. So your owners like, they expect you to pee in your shoes, but they can't get mad at you because they're the owners and they are the superior. Like it's so I know it's going to break my heart at some point once we start talking about it more and thinking about it on the deeper levels of what it all means and what it represents. But I'm allowing myself this brief 60 pages of levity of just enjoying the linguistic games that he's playing of, at first I was like, oh, it's one of those things where the character speaks in this, let's call it vernacular or dialect, but internally thinks like all of us do internally, because that's like the great equalizer is the voices inside our head, or like our own narrative brain function. But then you turn a few pages, you're like, oh no, fuck, this is, like I said, like a sleeper cell of literati
Yeah.
in in this book. And all the words like code switching, where it just puts
Yeah.
that into such a different perspective, and that's where you start to get into the greater weeds of things, and like, episodes of shows like Big Mouth where they have the code switching episode.
Mhm.
And I mean, already, like, I'm happy to sign on and go back through his catalog of books and read more Everett, because I like it. I like it a lot.
Yeah. You're specifically talking about chapter 2, where like
Yeah.
he's teaching a number of seven children, or with his wife and seven children, or six children, sorry, how to speak for white people. And so like they're like, Papa, why do we have to learn this? It's like white folks expect us to sound a certain way, and it can only help if we don't disappoint them. And then it goes through
Right.
like, how do you do this? Like if something on fire, they're like, here's how you put it out. And he's like, no, no, no. White person has to come up with the idea.
That's
Yeah.
too
What's the
direct.
correct incorrect grammar?
Yeah.
I feel like this sort of maps onto like some of the stuff that you see related to like women in boardrooms. Like, like
I
Women in
actually showed this
podcasts.
chapter. I just let my wife cold read this chapter
oh yeah.
because she works in a world where it's 97% male.
Hmm.
Um, and I mean, that's good because I think just a few years ago it was about 100% male. So they're making some progress. Um, and I was just asking her if like, does any of this track with you as far as your experience of how you can get your job done? And she's like, oh my God, this is like exactly it. Like it has to be the man's idea. So I have to talk in a way where I'm dumb enough. I know there's a problem, but I'm not smart enough to fix it exactly myself until they can come up with a solution. And then once it's their idea, oh my God, let's run with it. Whereas if she just like directly says, let's do this, like, no, you can't put out the fire that way. Like, let me go get some sand. Oh, okay, yeah. Like she was, I found it very interesting how this exactly tracked with her. Yeah.
So backing up for 1 second, because I think this is key to the themes that you're talking about, especially related to this chapter, is you guys know the Notebook of Daniel Decatur Emmett, which opens this. Uh,
Mhm.
you're familiar with him,
The
no,
songs, yeah.
the song. So
I was not.
he's a composer, but he also is the founder of the first troupe of blackface minstrel stuff, and is remembered as a composer of Dixie. These songs are his attempt at creating a black vernacular, is what he thought was the black Southern vernacular, with like the different grammar and whatnot, and all in praise kind of the South and like pro everything. He is truly like a masquerading in various ways, but as a white man masquerading as black slaves in a lot of places, and then of course as blackface. So it's like another offensive thing that leads into this book.
Yeah. I remember like as a kid, you would hear song like cartoons, especially like Looney Tunes, like the Jimmy Crack Corn and I Don't Care song.
Hmm.
And it would always be played by like a Southern crow that had a cigar in his mouth and a banjo, right? And as
Yeah.
like you would just sing it like think it's a cute song, having no clue whatsoever of like how like what this monstrosity is and how hurtful it actually is. And like, yeah, just roll it out for the kids. It'll be fun.
Yeah.
So is it equally safe then to admit that I was offended by the font choice as well? To
Well, yes, the
mimic
font.
handwriting. I was
I
like, this
couldn't
is
read it.
this
That's
sucks.
why I made sure I knew who this was because I was like, wait, I can't figure out what the fuck any of this is because like
Yeah.
90% of these words are like indecipherable to me.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
a Southern Pushkin font. I don't know what this is.
It's ass is what it is. And also like it might speak to the fact that none of us can read cursive anymore, but I think I can read cursive. It's not in this particular
Yeah.
version of it. It's so ugly. So yeah, so that's okay. So that before
I
we get
love chapter two, but it felt to me like it was just so on the nose. Like it hit me over the head too fast. Like I'm not a mouth breathing idiot, and it made me feel like that a little bit.
it is a little bit like right there, although I mean, I think that there's another function to it though, from a craft standpoint, maybe, is that he
Yeah,
doesn't then have to keep up the dialect. Because the rest of
yeah,
it, and I'm
yeah,
not going to try and read any of those sections in that dialect because it just be massively offensive. But like reading it on the even like reading it internally in your mind, like you are following that, but like that's exhausting. And I
yeah,
wonder, I don't know if that goes through the whole book, but this gives an out. And it creates a character. The character has like
yeah,
intelligence is foregrounding like who that character is, but also from like that other side. Now you don't always have to do that. Like
yeah.
you got a way around it, so you don't
Well,
have to worry
like,
about it.
look, take the fever dream, for instance, a little bit
Yes.
later in the book, right? Masterful. Love the way that when he is in his natural state, right? Natural state, when he's suffering from being bit by a rattlesnake and doesn't have the mask anymore. And
Yeah.
Huck's like, what are these words you're saying?
Yeah.
He's like,
Like, oh, the devil was in
uh,
me.
those aren't real words. Don't worry yourself about any of that. Let me get
Yeah.
back to doing this now. Like
I love
that was brilliant. Fantastic. Loved it.
with that. I love how they're like, oh, we just explain, like we have to, they don't say it, but like their posturing of believing in like witchery and demonology to make white people feel comfortable. It's more of a reflection on white people believing in that stuff than
Yeah.
anyone
Yeah.
else.
That's actually, I don't think this is in. So one of the things I marked a bunch of instances in this. And since you two haven't read Huckleberry Finn recently, have you?
Within the last 5 years.
Okay. Okay. Brian, probably not.
I've read enough times where I'm pretty familiar with the brushstrokes of it.
Yeah, same. I mean, I only read it once before now because
Okay.
like I never cared to go back after
I
like high
think I've
school.
maybe read it 4 times in
Damn.
total. Yeah.
Damn. So, okay, so you've read a lot more, but there are like all the pieces and plot points. There are a number of points in here where they're slipped in here and never explained. Like for
Mhm.
instance, when Huck Finn says he sold his wealth to the judge for $1, that's a whole chapter or two in the book itself and has like a larger context to it, and all of it's designed so that his dad, who's back in town, can't get it, right? So he can't get it
Yeah.
as money because he doesn't have money. There's and like that's just like passed over here. There's more I have to say about that, but it does remind me that I saw a number of things where online where people are like, well, now we can teach Huck Finn. If we teach these two books together, then you get like this way of talking about Huck Finn that's more three-dimensional and more like filled out. So in a way, this book kind of almost reaffirms that Huck Finn will be taught in schools, but with this other component to it, which is kind of an interesting like twist to it, right? But there are a number of spaces where that happens, where it's like, if you don't know the Huck Finn story, you can go buy it. But some of it's like, oh shit, this is like a huge plot point in the other books.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
superstitions is one of them. Like they don't reference it here, but Huck Finn and before the ball that he hears the things from and says like you're gonna meet these two women, and before the rattlesnake, which is like in the book, in Huck Finn, I think he's like don't touch the rattlesnake skin. I don't remember him being in bed. I might be forgetting that. But like don't touch it, that's always bad luck. And Huck Finn in the narration of Huck Finn says like, oh, if only I knew how much terrible stuff was going to happen to us as a result of this. But before all that, he spills salt and is like being like, oh no, I need to get the salt over my shoulder before like the devil come and like screw up my life. And he doesn't because Miss Watson stops him or is like, that's silly or does something. And then he's like, oh, and then all these things start going wrong. So like the superstitions are like wedded in there and like James playing with them is pretty fun. I agree with you, Kai, 100%. But that was one that stood out to me as like, oh, there's more of this. And it comes like even predates like his thing. The only one that I noticed that was weird was that he says at some point here, James says, I never had money. And in Huck Finn, when that scene comes up, he says, I did have money. At one point in time, I had like $14 and I bought a horse, and the horse was like bullshit. Like he got grifted, and then I got rid of the horse for like $2, and then that never happened. And he's just like, I don't want money no more. I don't want any money ever again. The son, 39, he says, I wouldn't know. I ain't never had no money. But in Huck Finn, he has. And it's like a little tale of like how he got grifted and like it didn't work out and is like, no, I'm good. I thought that's an interesting difference, maybe. Maybe it's not. It just like stood out to me because it was like fresh enough in my mind to recall that. But I do like the way in which the adventures of Huck Finn shows up in here off screen.
Yeah, and I think there's like some definite setups that I'm really looking forward to the emotional payoff that's going to happen. Like obviously, we get James protecting Huck from his dead father when
Hmm.
he's seeing the when he sees the dead body in the
Yep.
water. So this idea of like how because there's going to be a scene later. If spoiler alert for Huckleberry Finn, if you haven't read it, what's wrong with you? Uh, um, but there's that scene where they get lost from one another. It's like chapter 25 or like way
Yeah.
in the 20s, right? And there's this like really tender moment where Jim is exhausted and just completely beat and he's asleep on the raft. And so Huck plays a prank on him, like perfect timing to play a prank on him. And there's like this absolute tender, heartbreaking moment where Jim is like, I would have died for you. I would have done anything for you. And you're playing a trick on me. Like, even if you don't see me as a human being, I'll do that for you because you're my friend and I care for you. And
Yeah.
like that scene,
Yeah.
that scene's gonna have to play out in this book at some point. And then
Yeah.
like, and then
I
Huck has
hope.
that realization of like, oh my gosh, I have to apologize to an N-word, and I'm gonna humble myself to do that. And they're like so there's this moment where like like Jim is like the most transparent maybe in the entire book in that scene, and then Huck just fucks it up because he's an idiot,
Because
right?
he's
Like,
a child. He's a
well,
child.
The
well,
child.
what's the very first line in this book? Those little bastards, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
that's
what he is. And it starts with
great,
them playing
great
like,
line.
I'm just trying to live my life and you're gonna like nail my hat and say it's a witch and I'm gonna have to go along with your stupid games because I have to, like, right? That's my
Yeah,
life. That's what I'm living. So I'm like these setups for like I cannot wait to see how these emotional moments are gonna pay off with James instead of Jim. So I'm really looking forward
yeah,
to those. And they're
especially
definitely set up like you said.
And
especially from his perspective. I really quick, Chad, just because Brian brought it up, like, or it was kind of skirting around it. That's, and if Brian, you remember, but that's one of the things that Toni Morrison talks, I think, the most about in her introduction is this idea of like who's like a good who's like a good father figure, and truly to Huck Finn, that
Mhm.
is Jim,
yeah.
and and um and that's one of the issues that she talks about. And so him being this heartfelt, friend and replacing that, that's also why I'm ready to have my heart broken
Yeah.
because I know
Well,
it's coming.
and I think that works even on a bigger scale because I had one, I remember, I don't know, this is like 800 years ago, but I remember having one of my professors in American history talking about the best way to understand America and American history, especially the colonies, is like think of it as like a stepchild that the parent didn't want. And you finally like break off from the family and you're on your own and you develop fatherless. That's the United States.
We've got
And
two
so
fathers now.
well, yeah. We have our South African father and our one that's going to finally take back Greenland from those tall white people. I cannot
Red,
wait.
white, and blue land, man. Red, white, and blue land.
But that idea of like trying to work things out without having like that that moral compass or that guidepost for you, right?
Yeah.
And so, like America as a whole, you see that with how like just despicable the country is and how problematic it is. And then you see it with Huck with like, oh shit, my life's a mess. So yeah, I mean that's
It,
like
you know,
I
that's
think it works on multiple levels that what Morrison was talking about.
this is maybe a flip side of that, and I don't know if this came up, but also like that idea of being fatherless and being like the stepchild that gets away is also like grand American freedom. Like you're
Hmm.
free to do whatever you want. Like there is
Yeah.
still that like even in Huck Finn and to the lesser degree I think Tom Sawyer, like the fact that he is quote unquote dead and is going and doing all these crazy ass adventures. Like I forget how old he's supposed to be, but like not age appropriate by our time at all to be floating down the Mississippi River, like getting off at Cairo or wherever he wants to get off at and hanging like pretending to be a woman to go get information and staying in people's places and hiding out like but he is totally quote unquote free by like American standards at that point of just doing whatever he wants and like that freedom compared to Jim's non-freedom as a slave is obviously like a theme to go into but I do see where like people have said like this Huck Finn is the book the best American book about freedom because there is something that's untethered and part of it is that fatherlessness.
Hmm.
Although
Yeah, there is this that's one way to look at it, but also the untethered, the loneliness of it.
Hmm.
And they're both, I mean, both Huck and Jim are their movements are their trajectory is fear-based.
mm-hmm. Maybe it is sort of like a comeuppance to like the idea of like the self-reliant individual as well. Like it only goes so far. Maybe like it goes back to our confidence man conversations of like there's still a society that you have to join in with. It's sort of like my anti-spiritualist self-help vibe is that they're generally fairly selfish. It's like I can't change the world until I fix myself and then the world will be better, but it's like there's still a world there that you have to interact with, buddy. Um so maybe it is like a little bit of a, communal thing. I do believe, and I could be wrong, but I believe that this book does veer off from Huck Finn at some point in time, that it follows the plot of the book of Huck Finn for a while and then changes. But
Well, yeah, we got maybe it's him in an adventure with Voltaire or something. Who knows?
Well, isn't there so Huck Finn when doesn't he spend like a couple weeks pretending to be a girl at some point? Or am
that's
I
how long it
misremembering
is. It's
that?
a few days. It's a
Okay,
few
a few days. It's okay. It seemed longer in memory, and that's why I'm thinking like, yeah, it's gonna have to veer off because there are stretches of time in Huck Finn where Jim is not around Huck.
yes.
Yeah, the things I'm noticing in this first part is this idea of like masks,
Mhm.
mirroring
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
mirrors, for sure, and then irony
Yeah. There's in that
are kind
great
of the big
story about
ones.
irony.
And then like the masks thing, it makes me think of like this as Huck being a girl, like that's going to be a mask he's going to wear, and it's not going to work for him, right? You don't know how to
No.
stand, you don't know how to stand right, speak right, act right. Like you're awful at this role.
You don't cross your legs in the right way. You don't know how to
No.
thread a
And it
needle.
makes you, and it kind of makes you wonder, like as as a reader, like your spidey senses start going off. Like, oh, is James gonna be? Is he gonna when he's supposed to be Jim? Is he gonna be James? He already slipped once. Is this could be a problem if you can't act right?
Well, my prediction, may I make a prediction, which might everyone might already know, but
These are
may
great.
I?
Absolutely.
My prediction is that James is going to be the name that he gives himself because he writes when he has the paper and or the ink and he writes, "My name is Jim," or "That's the name that was given to me." So
True.
that is my prediction: is that he is going to name that is going to be his chosen name is James.
Under a similar assumption, maybe I should have said this at the start, but I've been trying throughout this to designate James as this book and the character from the Percival Everett book, Jim being from Adventures of Huck Finn,
Yeah.
and references to Huck Finn being Adventures of Huck Finn, not the Huck Finn and James as much as possible. It's going to be kind of hard. I mean,
Gotcha. Okay.
but that's why I've been leaning on James as being the character here in this book.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it'd be just a mess, right? Just a
Well,
mess.
well, I speaking of messes, I started thinking last night because I was just letting my thoughts wander where I at any point is he called Big Jim and Huck Finn because there's the Big Jim cat character and Dogman.
Oh God.
Where I was like, I hope that there's not, I hope that's just a coincidence that there's not a lot of overlap because otherwise my worlds are merging in ways that I am not prepared for right now.
Yeah, you don't need Dogman in your Everett. That's not like peanut butter and chocolate.
No, keep. I like Dogman, but keep Dogman out of Everett. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else that you guys wanted to touch upon in this particular section? I mean, I too, like, we didn't ask this at the beginning. I really enjoyed reading it. It's like, it is like, in contrast to some of the more like really complex or strange books that we've read, where it's like hard to like even necessarily decipher what's happening. This is kind of like not on the surface, but it's like comprehensible and like this is a smart book in which if you're a decent reader, you're going to get a lot out of and you're going to enjoy it. It goes down smooth. It's like not crazy and it is thought provoking. It's funny. I generally enjoy it as a reader and I'm curious to where it goes, but I don't know what you thought, Brian.
Yeah, it feels like a fastball down the middle.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Since
a
his
reader
since
sort of
his
is
first
too,
book was
although
about a baseball player, I'll do a baseball
200.
metaphor.
That was the funniest. We were talking about this ahead of time, but Suitor, I think it's called, is about a baseball struggling third baseman who bats under 200, which at the time in 1984 when that came out, that would have been outrageous. But by 2025 standards, not that big of a deal,
Yeah.
honestly. That's actually not that bad. Oh man, but anyway, so nothing else, anything else, any themes anyone wants to bring up?
Most of my comments in the margins are just about the code switching and yeah. Um, so nothing. I don't think anything.
So Brian, in 2000, okay, so in 2025, I think there was like 17 third basemen who batted under 200 in last season. There are only four in 1984. And those four are ones I've never heard of. Darnell Coles, Randy Reddy. That's a goddamn good name there. Randy Reddy, Nick Essexy, and Ron Jackson.
Oh, Ronnie.
So yeah.
Sorry, Ron Jackson. Hope you had a good arm.
Randy Reddy, though, I am. Who were you, Randy Reddy? He got 10 WAR over his career. He played for a long time for
I'm
Milwaukee,
guessing
San
Randy
Diego.
Reddy died of syphilis in San Bernardino, California. Just a guess.
Dude, Randy Reddy had a 5-win season, 5.4 wins for the San Diego Padres in 1987.
Hey, Southern
Uh,
California, I was close.
that dude must have been doping though, because like his stats do not match that at any other point in time. He's alive, man. He's 65.
Way to
He's
go,
not even,
Randy.
he's not even old.
Go get him, Randy.
Go, go, Randy
I,
Reddy.
I take back that you died a tragic porn star death. Like, I didn't mean it.
I do. Big warning to everyone listening this season. This season does overlap with spring training, so
Uh-oh.
buckle up. You guys got favorite lines?
I got one. It's on page 28. It's that last paragraph there. It says, I believe it's him and Luke are talking. He's going to get drunk now, not so much because he can, but because we can't, I said. Luke chuckled. So when we see him staggering around later acting the fool, will that be an example of proleptic irony or dramatic irony? Could be both. Now that would be ironic.
Yep. I
It's
love
like a
that.
Mel Brooks, like it looks like a Mel Brooks skit, like sketch or something like that, where you have two slaves with like wheat coming out of their mouth, and they're having like this deep philosophical discussion, and then like, oh, someone's coming. Hi. Yeah. And they start like picking their teeth or something like that.
Absolutely. Okay, you have yours ready?
I I can't find it, but I could approximate it. I think it is when Huck and Jim are watching the boat or whatever, the little boat go down the river, like trawling for his corpse, basically. Um, and Jim says hilarious, or I think it's hilarious, and Huck is just like, what? and, and Jim says something else. He's like, oh, I said Davy Harry or something, and he's like, oh
Yeah.
crap. But I just that's similar Mel Brooksy of like hilarious, another person, what?
Yeah, it's
Awkward silence.
oh, I can't find it. But mine is from a similar section is when he's talking when he's hallucinating when he's got the fever from the snake bite and he sees Voltaire and Voltaire says, "That is what equality is, Jim. It's the capacity for becoming equal. The same way a black man in Martinique can learn French and so become French. He can also acquire the skills of equality and so become equal. But I repeat myself. I hate you, I said through my fever and chills.
Yeah.
You realize, of course, that I've been bitten by a snake, only to have you come to me in this delirium? Yeah, motherfucker. I love it. That part cracked my ass up. It's so good. So next we could go through page 123. In case you don't know, again, that we're doing 2 books. This one will be over in 5 weeks. Like it's a pretty quick season for Jim. It's not a super long book, and it is very good, reads fast. So if you've listened to this for whatever reason and have not bought the book, I highly recommend getting it. And you can catch up super fast. It is very fun. It's a good book to read at this time. Got a lot going on.
It's a Heather's pick.
It's Heather's pick.
It's Heather's pick.
I have over the course of the podcast gotten naked with my book because I hate these jackets. But other than that, any final thoughts from anyone? Anything? There's a bunch of podcasts I listen to that have started, especially because of this Trump Elon shit, that have been like, here's a good thing going on. Here's a bright spot in life. Anyone have anything that you'd like to plug or say that's positive?
Check out Danzy Senna's books.
There you go. Is there one in particular you'd recommend?
The one I most remember because I read it in high school and I was very moved by it is I think it's her first Caucasia.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
And it's about 2 sisters, or I guess more appropriately, or technically half sisters. But it's about race and about it's like sibling connection, and also in certain ways about linguistics and language usage. And I do think she's a very interesting writer, so I would highly recommend checking out any of her books.
Also,
I think I read that in my Peter Thiel book club. There's one we had in there.
She goes into the political underground and is forced to live under assumed identity. So there's more masks for you.
Yeah.
She's written more books than I realized. Most recent one's from 2024, Colored Television. Just a sell. Brian, you got anything?
Nothing.
I've been watching a lot of TV, and most of it's pretty predictable, like The Pit and Severance. But there's a show called Paradise on Hulu that I am hooked on.
That is the dumbest show ever. I love it.
It might be the greatest show ever.
So dumb.
It's so awesome.
Greatest
The 4th episode where it becomes a superhero show for a half second, fucking awesome.
Oh wait, I haven't gotten there yet. Oh no.
Oh no, you have not seen the backstory of what's the guy's name? Not Sterling K. Brown, but the white guy who's the Secret Service protector, whatever his name is.
I don't know.
That guy is a superhero.
Okay.
So get ready. That show is wildly both dumb and the best show on television.
Well, at least you're not like me and watching the real lives. Or wait, what is it? Are we real lives or desperate? I don't even know. But the Salt Lake City Housewives, that is
The Desperate Lives of Bees.
The desperate lives of bad Mormons and their friends. So yeah, trash. We've got some like high hitter literature and the trashiest television, guys. We are interesting.
Well, I'm offended that in Black History Month we're getting the next season of White Lotus, but I'll still watch it.